Today, it's not just startups, it's everybody challenging everybody. I think those are the three things that are pillars to what we call digital transformation today. The world is changing because what technology is impacting. But what we're really trying to do with transformation is look at where our business needs to go and fit in the pieces of technology change that are going to allow us to adopt. I've been doing low code and no code technologies for over 20 years. I think you're going to see low and no code do the same thing for democratizing our ability to create technology. Let's build it, let's test it, let's get it in front of people quickly, and let's get feedback very quickly.
Today, I have here with me very tenured and experienced digital transformation leader and coach, Mr. Issac Sacolick. He has handled multiple projects across different organizations of different sizes and is also the best-selling author of two different books on digital transformation, the Digital Trailblazer as well as Driving Digital. I welcome Mr. Issac Sacolick to our session. Thank you very much, Issac, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are things right now from wherever you are, and how are you today?
I'm doing great, very happy to be here, and excited for the conversation around digital technologies.
Great. So where are you joining us from?
I'm from New York, but I get around quite a bit. I do speaking all over the world, but today I'm in New York.
Issac, I was going through your profile before we set all of this up, right? And I saw that you were a CTO in 1996. That's a long time ago, and that was a very senior position to have at that point in time. So, can you tell us and our audience a bit about your journey over the last 35 years, how your career has shaped up?
Yeah, I became the CTO in 1998, to be specific. And yeah, I was pretty young at the time. I was in my 20s. It was in a startup, so that wasn't a very common career path, particularly here in New York, to go straight out of grad school and go into a startup working in the media space. I started as the head of software development there. And when we went through our second, maybe it was our third round of financing, I was asked to step into the role of the CTO. And the interesting thing about that was, there were areas that I had a lot of experience in. I understood software development. I understood artificial intelligence. I had an AI background from my grad school days, but I knew relatively little around management, around infrastructure, around culture, around forming teams. So I did a lot of learning around that during my years as a CTO in startups. In 2007, I decided to make a pivot. And what happened was I had done a number of startups here in the New York area. Today, New York is a vibrant area for doing startup work, but back then it was a little bit dated. We had VCs that looked at startups very differently than what was happening out in California on the West Coast. It was a little bit more traditional and conservative. And I said that if I wanted to continue my career in startups, I better move to the West Coast. So I pivoted. I became a CIO. I started working at McGraw-Hill in one of their businesses called Business Week or Business Week magazine. And I was asked to bring startup culture, practices, technologies into Business Week and later into McGraw-Hill because we knew Business Week's business model, the way we were producing content, the way people were consuming content, the advertising business model, all that was ripe for disruption and required a lot of technology know-how to go and turn that around. So I was a CIO at Business Week. I then became a CIO at a construction data company. That company is now called Dodge Data and Analytics. And then a CIO at a financial services company, Greenwich Associates, that's now part of S&P. And so that spanned 10 years of my career, walking into organizations with the same charter. Issac, how do we improve customer experience? How do we improve the data and analytics? How do we bring technology capabilities across the entire company, not just in IT? How do we change our business models? in terms of how we were delivering our products and services. I did that for 10 years, and I started a second career path in the middle of it, not knowing where it was going to go. Somebody said to me, Isaac, you need to connect your startup to the blogosphere. I had no idea what they meant, so I Googled it, and I said, oh, they want me to write a blog. So I started a blog on Blogger, and that blog net is called Social Agile and Transformation. It's blogs.starcio.com. I have almost 600 blog posts on it. Today I write for CIO Magazine, CIO Online actually, for InfoWorld. It led to writing two books, Driving Digital, which you mentioned, but my new book, Digital Trailblazer, takes you through that entire story of me sitting as a startup CTO all the way through my career today. But it's not linear. It's by subject and it's by topic. And you're sitting in the seat next to me as I'm living different moments. So it's like you're watching a movie and I'm by your side as I'm walking through my first board meeting. And I tell those stories. So that's Digital Trailblazer. I also started speaking during those careers, and that helped me pivot to my career today. I run a company called Star CIO. I spend most of my time working with technology companies around how do they position their technology for consumption, for buyers, for added use. But I also, the core of our business is helping companies develop centers of excellence, promote agile, become more DevOps oriented, use low code platforms, become more data oriented. We have an entire set of platforms for coaching, and we have our own agile methodology called Star CIO Agile Planning. So that's kind of my entire career in 3 minutes.
Awesome, awesome. So, you have seen the entire world evolving around technology, right? For the largest part of it, organizations used to see technology as something that would drive their business. But at some point in time, from being mere enabler, it became absolute absolute pivot points for organizations to overgrow other big organizations that they were competing with. In your decades of experience, if I ask you as to what were those 3 or 4 major milestones which you saw absolutely pivoting the way business is done, what would you list out? What would form your top 3 major changes?
Well, I think you just actually highlighted one of them, the idea that a startup could come in with a new way of conceiving a product or service, start out really small in terms of its capabilities, but almost magically and almost overnight grow audience to the point where it was disrupting an existing business model. We saw that in newspapers. The startup I was doing in 98 was helping newspapers bring their content online. And that included their news articles, it included advertising and classified ads. Classified advertisements back then were 85% of a newspaper's business. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it was disrupted in several waves. It started with websites like Hot Jobs and Monster.com that were doing it in employment, and Cars.com and autos. And then Craig Newmark and Craigslist came out, and then eBay came out. So that completely started disrupting where you're placing your car ads, your employment ads, at least here in the United States. Then it shifted, with display ads. Instead of buying $100,000 ad in a magazine, you are now spending maybe a few $1,000s to do banner advertisements through Dart and other advertising platforms. So, first and foremost, I think it's this notion that you can come in and ask a question. This was all the way back into the 90s. What would a startup do in 3 years or less with $1 million or less? And be able to disrupt your business model, take away your customers, test a new customer experience, build a new supply chain or connect the supply chain. We saw that with Uber and Airbnb. So that's sort of the business side of something that we've been seeing. The second is the notion that a digital channel is not just a supplementary channel to how you're doing business today, right? So we used to think print versus digital and media, or brick and mortar and online purchasing for a retailer. And what you see today is omni-channel. I'm a person. I'm going to interact with a brand in a lot of different ways. I expect a consistent experience. I expect them to know who I am in a very consistent and private way. If I call up a customer support channel, I expect them to know who I am, what products I'm using, what my issue might be based on my last interactions. So we're doing not only omni-channel, but we're very, very data-driven in how we're operating, connecting the front end of the customer experience to the back end in terms of how our operations are running. So I think that's the second piece. And the third thing I would just say is a complete culture transformation. And by that, I mean, if you rolled back 20 years ago, if you needed something in technology, you got on a long list, you went back to the IT department, you made that request 30 or 40 times, you requested budget 4 or 5 times, maybe it would get prioritized. We would have to go do the entire stack development from purchasing infrastructure all the way up to being able to deploy applications, test them, and then run them in production. Today, if you flash forward today, most of the technology that I'm doing outside of the IT department. I'm providing capabilities to business users to self-serve their analytics or to build applications in a low-code or no-code platform or to do integrations. I'm trying to do it in a very cohesive way and empower the organization to work in a highly collaborative, experimental, agile, data-driven way. So I think if you put those three things together, how business models are being challenged today, it's not just startups, it's everybody challenging everybody. I think when you look at omni-channel experiences and becoming data-driven, and then you look at the impact of moving technology outside of IT and across the entire organization, the culture change that drives. I think those are the three things that are pillars to what we call digital transformation today.
Amazing. So, in fact, that was my follow-up question as to digital transformation as a word in itself, right? Everybody uses it. If you Google it, if you search for it, you will find across almost millions of vendors saying that we are your digital transformation expert. Now, what I have realized is that organizations kind of define it differently at different phases of where they are with respect to their growth. So, can you just elaborate your definition of digital transformation and the way you see it really making sense from an organizational growth point of view?
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that the technology, your operations, the products, and even the customer segments that you work with today are going to evolve significantly over the next 3 to 5 years, and it will continue to cycle and change over the next 3 to 5 years, right? So when I looked at the world in 2018, I was looking at growth, I was looking at competitive factors, customer experience was still a way to compete. Becoming more data driven was a way to compete. And we built our digital transformation roadmap, our point of view of how the business needed to evolve from that seat in 2018 of growth. All right. And then 2020, we looked at digital transformation very differently, right? We looked at it as the world is going through a pandemic. We need to switch to remote working. We need to think about how to care for employees in a different way than we thought about before. We have to think about collaboration. A very different way. We start thinking about inwards, how we were operating, how we were collaborating, how we were sharing information, what types of workflows didn't have technology behind them. That was the single most important thing we were trying to solve for was, the pat on the back, the email, the meeting that we couldn't do anymore to cement a workflow, and now we had to build it in technology. So that was 2020. You flash forward to 2022. Now, in certain parts of the world, we may be in a recession. We're still in growth mode in certain industries. There's some new technologies that are emerging that have the potential to disrupt. We have a lot of global and political disruption right now. And I've talked to a lot of CIOs. We're in a very balanced, I have to continue to grow. I have to continue to compete. And I have to continue to think about how to become more efficient. So that's the 2022 picture. And so the first thing to answer your question, digital transformation is really about looking at how the business needs to evolve because of outside forces, particularly technology forces, how the technologies are impacting customers and how they're impacting our way of working. I gave that definition back in 2017. I called it the digital lens. It's in chapter 7 of Driving Digital. And I talk all about, I think to answer your other part of your question, I think digital transformation sometimes inside corporations became a lightning rod for here's the next things in technology that we have to invest in. Okay, and made it very easy to connect the dots from board to CEO to CIO and say, look, our networks are dated. We have to put more mobile devices in. We have to get more efficient, move to the cloud. Some of our apps are on COBOL or outdated platforms. We need to go and modernize them. So it became a lightning rod for we need to transform, put money in technology. And so that was the inside enterprise view. That created a beacon on the vendor side to come back and say, you know what, we're going to be your platform for digital transformation. We'll help you accelerate digital transformation. We'll enable you to do some part of it, and a lot of that's true, right? They are filling a piece of the technology puzzle, but when you take a step back and you look at what we're trying to accomplish, we're trying to avoid what's happened to the newspaper industry. We're trying to avoid what's happened to Kodak, what Garmin actually survived. If you know Garmin's story, Garmin's made the device, the GPS devices that were going in our cars before iPhones were doing it for us, and they were doing our mapping for us. Overnight, iPhone shows up with mapping technology. They're not going to be able to sell a $400 device to go in your car to do that anymore. They pivoted their business very nicely. Microsoft pivoted their business very nicely. Desktop licenses, Office, um, and Windows shifting to Azure and Office 365 cloud technologies, and now doing another pivot again. So you're seeing what technology companies do when they rethink their marketplace around the impact technologies. And this is happening in every business. It's happening in higher ed. It's happening in hospitals. As they're coming out of the pandemic, they're thinking about where their industries are going. In higher ed, for example, virtual classrooms were a disruptive small competitor, and now it's an alternative, right? I can get university classes either in person, virtual, or a hybrid. So the world is changing because what technology is impacting. But what we're really trying to do with transformation is look at where our business needs to go and fit in the pieces of technology change that are going to allow us to adopt.
So technology is essentially, or digital is essentially context driven to a large part, and it keeps on transforming or changing itself at different points in time. Great. So how has cloud had an impact on it, right? Because I think about 15 to 18 years back, cloud was not such a big revelation, and today all that we can hear about, if you're not on cloud, you're not really doing your business properly. So how did you, as somebody who was involved in technology very hands-on during this transformation, perceive when it was first introduced, and then does it surprise you as to the adoption that it has taken over such a short span of time?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a funny story. If you go digging into my blog, you'll find a post. I think it was probably 2006 or so. And I ask a question: why is Amazon getting into the hosting business? I had a great
Ah,
retail business. They just announced their cloud business, and I was looking at this, and I said, I don't need this. I know how to do hosting. I can go with a credit card and get a virtual server in an environment, not have to worry about any of the operating system, the infrastructure, the storage. I just put this into a form, and out comes an environment. And so, I was obviously wrong about that, right? We were thinking about cloud from an pure infrastructure standpoint, and what cloud really means today, and what it always really meant, was moving up stack, right? And what I mean by that is, if you look at my startup back in 1996, we had data centers, we had physical servers, we had SANs and NAS for storage. We had to do all the networking around this. What what using an outsourced hosting provider and then cloud has started enabling us to do is to move up stack. We were no longer responsible for the infrastructure. We can now start automating the infrastructure, and we could start getting closer to the technology that's impacting our customers. Our customers don't care if I'm on Windows or Linux. My tech people might care about that. They may care about whether I'm Azure or AWS, but my customers think about is, am I delivering a reliable, high performing experience? Is it easy to use? Do I understand how to use the capability? Am I delivering features to my customers as easily as I should? I also think about employees just as equally as I think about customers. So, can my employees do the types of work they need to do and improve automation, improve their ability to connect a workflow or to integrate a new data source? None of that is a question about the underlying infrastructure. And so, what the cloud providers have really done is given IT in particular the tools to say you can focus on specifying all kinds of different ways to deploy, specifying all kinds of different stacks, find ways to automate it, find ways to scale it up and down reliably, and do this very efficiently. It still requires a tremendous amount of expertise, right? And that's sort of the asterisk when you start thinking about this. It still requires you to do a lot of the automation yourself. So it's not free, right? If I build a JavaScript, a Java, a .NET application, and I'm going to go put it on one of these clouds, I still have a lot of infrastructure work to do to be able to deploy these and configure these. But what cloud has really done is taken away the physical infrastructure steps and giving me a lot of choice about my way of deploying.
So I had this recent conversation with someone, and the core aspect that came out was that cloud enabled organizations to scale and to optimize at the same time if done right. And that's exactly what even you're echoing, right? It's not like it makes things easy. There is still a lot of work that goes under it, but it is essential for you to have that sky is the limit kind of approach to the way you do business. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I don't think it's completely made it easy. It's made aspects of last decade's work easier because the cloud essentially provides those services. So if I'm not down working at the physical storage level today, I have lots of storage options because of that. And I don't have to procure a NAS versus a SAN versus an archive storage. I can pick those and set them up and configure them. So there's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of expertise, but there's a lot more options and a lot more flexibility at a lot lower cost. And that's essentially what cloud has delivered.
Got it. Got it. All right. So that brings me to another question, right? So we are probably at a period where ChatGPT, for example, has made a lot of noise over the last 6 months. Though it has been around for way longer than that, it became a lot more accessible for people over the last 6 months. So what are the including AI, what are the different technologies that you see making a huge impact on how business is done right now, let's say for over the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, I think what AI and machine learning continuously point to is for inside the organization to make their data and make their processes accessible for these types of technologies. I wrote a post a bunch of years ago. We talk about dark data, we talk about low quality data, we talk about data silos, and we talk about applications that have poor integrations, right? And so now I think about doing predictions off of it. That's essentially what machine learning is doing, or being able to use a natural language prompted question to get answers out of my proprietary data, and thinking about what an LLM on my proprietary data is going to do for me. And so that's going to be a game changer over the next couple of years. The ability to ask for something and have it connected to platforms that can actually show you a prototype and show you something around this. You can do this today with Copilot. You can do this today with other technologies in the analytics space. where instead of writing a SQL query and instead of writing a query, you can actually ask it a question and it starts giving you dashboards and reports out of it. So I think LLMs, AIs will continue to amaze us. I mean, as long as we're putting money into this, and as long as we don't trip up into the scary space where we enable an AI to do something before the safety around it is ready for it. I read an article just yesterday applying LLM in a mental health capacity, provided scary advice to some folks. Safety, you have to look at what the safety factors in the domain that you're working in and say, do I really want to experiment in this space? But for many of us, we're working in areas where there's a lot of room for experimentation, a lot of room for testing things out. And I think LLMs and AI are a good area to do that. I think IoT is still in what I call early stages. The first generation around IoT has really been about connecting sensors and being able to create pipelines and bring data in and starting to do analytics. But when I think about IoT at the smart city scale or the smart building scale, and start looking at smart government. Now we're looking at 10 to 100 times the scale that we're talking about. We're not just talking about a single car, we're talking about a population of cars, a population of buildings. I think that's really interesting to me in terms of how all this is going to get connected. And then I think, what personally interests me is bringing the technology, some of it that's mainstream today, some of it that's emerging, into industries that are dire need for transformation, but have been laggards in adopting them. So healthcare, making healthcare more accessible, more reliable to more people at lower cost. Here in the United States, huge problem globally, an even bigger set of challenges. I think about digital health and being able to connect sensors, connect data that you capture yourself, feeding that information back to your doctor, and being able to get personalized medical recommendations on a more real time basis. Very interesting to me about what that's going to do in terms of how we stay healthier, how more people stay healthy, and how more medical becomes accessible to more people. So I think medicine's one very interesting area. I think education, which I mentioned earlier, this notion in the United States of spending, $50 to $100,000 a year for university training. At Business Week, we would chart the cost of a bachelor's and a cost of a master's for a graduating student, and do a ratio against their starting salaries. And every year, this curve would go up, meaning the ratio is getting worse, and it continues to get worse. And so I think that's going to be an interesting challenge about how do we educate more people in the face of them being able to do more things themselves, right? My son, I asked him to write a blog post to help me test something last night. He wrote it in ChatGPT. Good for him. It wasn't getting published anyway, or he just needed some text to fill into a blog post to test something. And here he was generating it. So universities, I think, are going to have to rethink their curriculum, rethink their model in terms of how they're working with students and parents and their fellow universities, with research, with the industry as a whole. I think that's very interesting. And then I think about construction and manufacturing. Again, lagging industries. But when I think about how quickly we have to fix yesterday's infrastructure issues, and how quickly we want to have smart cities, energy efficient buildings. I mean, tremendous opportunity around technologies. And I think those are going to be disruptive for many more businesses than we can count for today. Lastly, when I think about inside the organization, what does this all mean? It means I think more companies have to do more with technology. It's what I've been saying for 20, 25 years. It's where I started from on the culture side of things. I think, and I know this, I've been doing low code and no code technologies for over 20 years. I started this in 2002. Remember, I started my startup in 1998. 2001, the internet bubble burst. And so, very much like this year, all of a sudden we started to pivot. Not only do we have to grow, but we have to find efficiencies. And I couldn't take my team. I think we were about 40 or 50 Java developers, another 30 .NET developers. I couldn't take them and say, start working on internal applications around our finances, around our customer support, around our CRM, start working on these things and taking away from our customer facing business. So I invested in a low code platform. We started building internal workflow out of it. When I went into enterprise, I looked at all the enterprise tools that were out there, and I said, these are too expensive, too complicated. I can't roll them out. I can't get people to do anything with them. I need to be more efficient. I started looking at low code platforms to enable us to do more things in the enterprise. And eventually, McGraw Hill started adopting those low code technologies, saying the same thing and it's answering the same questions at scale. And today, I look at it as a democratization. I know there are departments that know more about their business flows and their data than they could ever teach and educate IT. And I know more of those departments have people who are technology savvy. They've gone through and done coding as a high school student or as a college student, but they don't want to work in IT. They want to work in marketing. They want to work in finance or operations. They've learned that space. They're versed in technology. And my role as a CIO is to enable that, is to provide platforms for them. It's to provide best practices. They don't understand version control. They don't understand testing. They don't understand compliance from a security perspective, but they can build their workflow out. And so I help bring these two gaps together, bring a platform to them so they can continue to evolve their technology capabilities and build best practices to them so that they can enable that for a sustainable way of operating.
Great. And I love the fact that you brought out low code because that's something that's obviously really, really close to us at Zoho Creator as well, right? So from a democratization point of view, you mentioned, now there are a couple of things that immediately comes into picture, right? The You're letting people who are not traditionally tuned or trained to build application, and you're enabling them to build application. How do you, I mean, I know this technology has been forever, like it has been around for more than a couple of decades, but how do you see in the current context with the need to one grow very fast, so you need to have connected ecosystem of different applications sharing information with each other, also the security and compliance element to it, right? How do you see all these variables really impacting democratization, and how can organizations or low code vendors in itself incorporate or address the challenges around this?
Well, I think you hinted at at two different challenges there. Again, building an application and learning how to tinker and use technologies, there's a lot more people in organizations today that come in with that skill set, but they've never gone through a computer science degree or set of disciplines. So, when they put out a new version of their application, um, do they put out release notes? Do they have a way of backing up and going backwards in time if they need to go fix things? Are they creating audit control? So if I go and change data in a particular record, is that information logged that I changed it? Is there lineage against that? Is there a testing practice so that when I put out a new version, it doesn't break things? These are all software development disciplines that anybody who's done a Java app or a JavaScript app, they know these are important things. But my average citizen developer doesn't necessarily know what these things are, doesn't understand their importance, doesn't have the tooling around it. So there's a lot of education around this to, number one, make sure that when you build a low code app or low code integration inside marketing, you understand some of the disciplines that you have to take on and the responsibilities you're taking on in being able to build and support this. That's what its key area of building center of excellence is. It's one of the things that I focus on. I also think that what you're seeing is as low code becomes more available, more used, right? Every time I go into an organization and say we have to go modernize an app, before we start thinking of a lift and shift, and before we start thinking of having it rebuilt or re-engineered in the platform it was built in, can we talk about what the fundamental requirements are and see if we can do this in a low or no code paradigm? And I have to tell you, my numbers, 8 out of 10 times, okay, I can find ways to use low code paradigms to build something in a low code or a no code paradigm. Sometimes an architecture with two or three of these things, we can build them faster, we can build them cheaper, we can even build customer facing um, technologies. I was building customer facing low code for a decade now. So all these things are possible if you're open to the exploration. And I think what you're going to see the low code and no code vendors do is continually to take the capabilities that software developers have been doing and making them easier and more accessible to the citizen developer. So how do you test your application? How do you version control your application? How do you modularize your application? Can I create a low code service that does login, does something for me and make it accessible to all the other low code technologies that I'm using? So I think you're going to start seeing the same way we talked about cloud, moving infrastructure up stack, making some of those things easier, and then providing a lot more flexible capabilities. I think you're going to see low and no code do the same thing for democratizing our ability to create technology.
Right. And another thing that obviously is something that we have been exploring for a while is actually the AI impact on low code, right? From both point of view, as in from enabling developers to build better application on one side, and also making sure that they are building the right applications from a compliance point of view, from a security point of view. So the more matured adoption of AI becomes in low-code platforms, the more and more it will empower developers who are outside the traditional development teams to build apps that more or less would become indistinguishable between what the other party makes. So that's where we see the whole thing running towards, and really exciting times from that point of view. Another question that I had for you, right? We are again at a point where things are changing quite drastically. Right now, at this point in time, if a mid-sized organization comes to you and asks you for how do I go about approaching technology so that it can become that differentiator for me? What are the things that I need to keep in mind? How do I build a blueprint around how I implement different technologies different from what I have right now? What would be your advice to them? How should they get started with that whole process?
Well, you use the word differentiating, and I go back to having a good understanding of who the customer is, who the end user is, what real problem you're solving for them. So I actually work with many mid-sized organizations more than I do with enterprise, because mid-size, they can't go back and do the same things the same ways that the Googles and Netflixes do. They don't have the budgets, the talents, the stacks to be able to do that. Mid-size pretty challenging. You have all the same issues of evolving your business, but you got to do it at a fraction of the cost with a fraction of the talent. So I say to them, look, start with the fundamentals. Let's make sure we understand what customers are expecting from us today and where markets are going to be changing things going into the near future. I'm doing that with a government right now and looking at that. And we do this by doing very traditional vision statements to come out with a perspective. We do research to do testing around this. There's some parts of these steps. The technologies have changed to allow us to do this more efficiently, but you really have to understand what you're trying to build. Where's the differentiating going to come from? Where's the innovation required? And where is commodity just good enough? So we're going to start from that perspective. I think the second thing that's changed a lot is this notion of let's build it, let's test it, let's get it in front of people quickly, and let's get feedback very quickly, right? I don't want to make 6 months of research before I create my first prototype. I want to go from vision, a few conversations, a few lines of research, and say, let's have a conversation around how do we do something quickly, put it in front of some people and learn and see if we're heading in the right direction. And that's counterintuitive across many organizations today. There's still a notion of let's make sure we get all our requirements in. We only got one shot at IT to do this. Let's make sure that everything we need is in here. And I have to do a lot of unwinding with these groups and say, let's focus on two or three things that we can go test and validate. And so when I think about mid-size again, I can go through a process of going from vision statement to some requirements to some wireframes to some prototypes and take 3 months to go from concept to being able to put something in front of users. Or I can skip a few of those steps and say, let's do this 2 or 3 times. Let's understand the types of applications that we're likely to build and see if we can procure some citizen type platforms that are going to act as accelerants. So if I have to build a lot of mobile applications, I'm going to look for a platform to do that. If I have to bring in a lot of data sources, I'm going to look for a platform that helps me do those kinds of things. If I'm dealing with a lot of documents, right, over a lot of structured data, I know I have that type of problem. That's how I'm going to think about this from an architect's perspective. But I'm going to use these low code paradigms to come back and say, can I shrink that 3 months to maybe 3 weeks, right? And in a single sprint, be able to put something in front of customers and get some feedback around it. Not that it's going to be a production ready product, but it's going to give me enough of a feedback from a small audience that says, here's what I need to do next. And that starts changing the mindset and the culture. Because when you start getting real feedback, people have come into the conversation with preconceived notions about what this thing needs to do and what they want it to do, are now hearing what customers are telling them it needs to do. So this is where I'm connecting the dots between what I think mid-sized companies need to do, get closer to their customers, accelerate being able to bring technology to them, and use technologies that are going to be accelerants for them, what I call force multipliers. If you want to go searching through my blog, I've done a lot of writing around how to find digital transformation force multipliers, and I have a couple articles around that, around low and no code platforms is key to that.
But then the iterative nature of how you go about it is going to be key in actually getting the adoption larger, right? And I wanted to touch upon the culture aspect as well, which you briefly did. And being a CTO, you would have been hands-on into seeing that there are a lot of ideas that are coming in which you want to implement across organization. But then the culture becomes the biggest obstacle in it actually showing the results that you had in mind when you were pinning it down. So from a low code and all other emerging technology point of view, right? When you have a workforce which is a mix of different generations, culture aspect of adopting newer technology, how would you advise organizations on going about it? How do you bring all stakeholders onto the same plate and get them to work for a single vision that is there?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. I think the one universal part of this answer is that what I've been calling digital transformation, I think it needs to be a core competency. So you're actually changing the culture by bringing these technologies and bring these practices in, because we know that what we're focusing on and what we're building today is going to be different in 2 or 3 years. We used to talk about build an app, keep the day 2 model running for 6 months and do a couple of updates, and then everything else becomes patches after that and major upgrades. And then we wonder why we walk into our organizations and see a lot of tech debt and a lot of legacy systems is because we're not investing in the iterative nature of technologies and continue to upkeep and maintain what we have, but also continue to upkeep and maintain to the customer expectation and to the customer need. So you say, how do you unwind this? And this is where things get hard. Every organization's a little bit different. I do this for a living, and particularly mid-sized organizations, it's not like a startup where you're starting with a clean slate of paper. You can go after any market. You can go after any set of customers that you pick from your starting. You can pivot much easier. You don't have a lot of legacy technologies. You're creating the culture on the fly. So you have a lot of ways to maneuver around that. In a medium-sized company, you're going to have people who've been with the company 30 or 40 years who are indoctrined in how things were operating all that period of time. You're going to have some people who come in who really don't want technology. They liked the way business was running 30, 40 years ago. They made a good living doing it. They're comfortable doing it. They don't need virtual assistants. They don't need mobile technologies. They just want to sit with a spreadsheet and do some things and get things done and go home to their families. So you get some of those teams. You get some people who are very aggressive,
Mhm.
who want to try new things. And today it's one flavor of technology. Tomorrow it's another flavor of technology. They have no appreciation for the complexity and cost to support 10, 20 different stacks of technology because 5 generations of developers came in and decided to build their own technology. So you have that group of people. You have developers and IT folks who, I learned JavaScript, so all I want to do is JavaScript, and everything is a JavaScript problem or everything is a VMware problem. So, you get flavors of these different mindsets people are coming in, and you have to take people out of their comfort zone and bring them into a new space and start saying, look, we joined this company for this mission. Here's our mission that we're trying to get to. Here's the customers that we're trying to impact. Here's what growth and success look like. And we do that at an organization level. Then we do it at maybe a product or a customer segment level or a business level. And then we start doing it at the application level. So I had a client just yesterday asked me, he said, Isaac, we're implementing a WAF and we're putting it across a part of our business. Do we need to create a vision statement around this? It's going to take us 2 months to move off of our existing technology onto this new WAF that gives us load balancing and a whole bunch of other services. And I said, of course you got to write a vision statement. You have 4 people working on this. How are people going to know why they're doing this? How are they going to make good decisions sprint to sprint about what choices they implement and what choices they don't implement? So I'm giving you a lot of different flavors of this.
Got it.
But what it really comes down to is that we're going to continue to evolve in short sprints. And I like using that word. Read my writings. You see, I'm a very agile forward person, but I need to have a bigger picture. Where is this all going? Where's my release going? Where's my roadmap going? And when we bring these two together, you can really start showing transformative impacts.
And that's where a true digital leader kind of comes in, pulling in everybody and showing them that there is one vision that we are working forward to. I have one final question for you, Isaac, which is very different from whatever we have discussed right now. But I'm very, very curious that of all the different projects that you have been a part of, right? Which is that one project that still gives you goosebumps, that still gives you the satisfaction of, okay, this was well done, and I'm really proud of this.
Yeah, I mean, every time I do a workshop, I start off with a picture of my team at Business Week that put out our first versions of our product there, and there, it was a very it was an inflection point time. This was 2007, and we had no idea whether we could run agile inside an enterprise, a Fortune 100 enterprise on Sixth Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, and get the talent, get the technologies to be able to do things, and work on a customer facing website, a Business Week website that had a very strong brand, and start really doing things that were competing against some of our disruptors. I have one great picture of all of us standing there, very diverse group. We had employees, we had contractors, freelancers. We were working with service providers from different parts of the world. We were all there smiling. I don't remember what, it probably wasn't even our first release when we took that picture. Um, but just being able to see so many people excited by their accomplishments, and that was my fuel to continue doing what I'm doing, to say, look, we can have more companies, not necessarily do it. Mark Andreessen said, not everybody is a software or technology business, but every company needs technology to be a core competency, and very often needs places where it's a differentiator and driving some innovation with their customers. So I truly believe that. I believe that for mid-sized companies. I believe it for nonprofits and for governments. I also know that the technologies and the practices that we're doing have to be aligned to their organization's needs. So I think being able to see that and do that in real time early on, see a transformative impact, and then continue to do that through my career after that is the moment that I'll share with everybody.
Amazing, amazing. You clearly are the journey person here. You enjoy the journey, and it's very, very evident from how you talk about everything, how you talk about technology, how you talk about your team.
Yeah, that's why I call my second book Digital Trailblazer. I mean, we're all trailblazing, and if you do read that book, you'll get the sense of what it's like to be a transformative leader, because you'll be sitting next to me during most of the more difficult moments that come up during transformation. It's not easy.
Great. And as a final note to our audience, right? If they want to reach you, how do they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
I'm very open to responding to folks on LinkedIn, so you can look me up by my name, Isaac Sacolick, N-Y-Ike, N-Y-I-K-E on Twitter, that you can follow me. And then please do follow me on my blog. That's blogs.starcio.com. And you can join my newsletter at starcio.com/driving-digital. We'll get you to sign up. I write 10 articles a month across multiple websites, and you get access to all of them through that one newsletter.
Awesome, awesome. We'll make sure that we'll leave the links so that our audience can access it. Thank you very much, Isaac. This was a fantastic discussion, and it was lovely to hear your experience and your take around everything, including low code for us. So, thank you very much for joining us, and this was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to meeting and shaking your hand one day.
Oh, same here, same here. Soon enough, hopefully. All right. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.